Hello everybody, Dave Neal here, stand-up comic host of Bachelor Nation News. Happy Tuesday morning. In this video, we've got a dissertation, an essay by Chad from Game of Roses. It's called The State of Bachelor Nation. I'm going to read it for you guys in its entirety. Definitely go check out their page, their Instagram podcast, Game of Roses podcast. Obviously, it's a big hit. I got their merchandise. It fits very nicely, Game of Roses t-shirts and all that jazz. But he does a great job of articulating the moment when producers began editing the leads with malicious intent and how the show misplaces its dramatic moments and all this jazz. A lot of good information here, but this is going to be a good one to just sit back and listen. So do me a favor, follow me on Instagram at DNeals and also patreon.com/Dave Neal for behind the scenes bonus content. A lot of people have been asking actually today. Our friend Ben was like, where can I get that speech you gave to DePaul University? It's a private link, but it's on the Patreon, and you can see my 90-minute conversation with DePaul University regarding Bachelor, how I make my income through Bachelor, talking about social issues and all of that. All right, well, let's get into it. The State of Bachelor Nation by Chad, co-host of the Game of Roses podcast and co-author of How to Win the Bachelor. I'm going to play some music, some cinematic music in the background here. You guys ready to go? The State of Bachelor Nation. A new season of The Bachelor is right around the corner. Mondays are about to transform from mundane, even hated beginnings of work weeks into sacred occasions sanctified with wine and merriment at watch parties surrounded by our fellow enthusiasts. It is normally a time for celebration, but this year feels different. The show has evolved an immense amount since its debut in March of 2002, but the past 2 years have produced the most drastic changes over the shortest period of time the franchise has ever seen. And these changes have not been good. The production restrictions caused by COVID-19, coupled with a producer culture that seems to have open contempt for everyone on the show, leads, including, has left The Bachelor in a place we've never really seen as an audience. The goal of constructing a satisfying love story with a few villains thrown in for our entertainment has been traded in for a no-holds-barred Squid Game-style festival of suffering from which only official Bachelor Nation podcast hosts seem to be immune. Drama has been replaced by misery, and instead of escaping our own lives for 2 hours on a Monday night, we find ourselves rooting for contestants to find their own escape from the tortuous circumstances designed by the producers. Our guilty pleasure has become more guilt than pleasure. To understand why the upcoming Season 27 of The Bachelor is so crucial and why producers have once again cast a Bachelor that does little to fan the flames of our enthusiasm, we must first take a trip back in time to see where the train began to go off the tracks in the first place. It all began in 2014 when the first villain Bachelor would set off a cascade of events and decisions that led us to where we are today. The first villain Bachelor. For the first time in Season 18, after Juan Pablo had contentious interactions with Andy Dorfman and Claire Crowley, producers decided to present The Bachelor as a villain in the edit itself. Bachelor producers use a wide variety of editing techniques to exacerbate or even create from thin air behavior, dialogue, and circumstances to further whatever narratives they deem necessary for good TV. And before Season 18, the producers had never turned these techniques on a lead in order to make them look worse. But once that sacred pact to protect the lead at all costs and present them as the ultimate catch was broken, it became commonplace. Season 19's Bachelor Chris Soules was presented as a bumpkin. Season 20's Ben Higgins was convinced to tell two contestants he loved them in what was presented as the ultimate act of betrayal. Season 21's Nick Viall was already a villain in 2 prior seasons of The Bachelorette. Bachelorette Season 12's Caitlin Bristow was maligned for having sex before fantasy suites. It's widely believed producers purposely cast a contestant with racist social media posts in Lee Garrett to court the first black Bachelorette in Season 13's Rachel Lindsay. And the list goes on and on. The rise of Instagram. Then in May 2014, Andy Dorfman's Season 10 of The Bachelorette catapulted her to become one of the first influencers from the franchise when she had 1 million Instagram followers and began selling sponsored content. This new ability for a lead to make money from the fame they cultivated by appearing on the show might have possibly exacerbated the growing disdain that producers were seemingly starting to feel for leads. Their time on the show wasn't the most important thing for them anymore. It was what came after. Selling SponCon, writing a book, building a brand, getting paid. And so the producers lost a little more control not only of the contestants and leads themselves, but of the overall narrative and underlying deceit of the show that it only exists to help the lead find their soulmate. Bachelor in Paradise. And then immediately on the heels of Dorfman's season 10, the first season of Bachelor in Paradise aired in August of 2014. While season 1 of Bachelor in Paradise didn't produce any lasting relationships, for the first time it forged a path in the franchise for non-leads to have a second chance at enough screen time to build social media followings that allowed them to start careers as influencers right alongside the leads. So this secondary goal of getting invited to Paradise became a prize as valuable as being named Bachelor or Bachelorette, and the notion that anyone who participated in the show for the right reasons became much harder for anyone to believe. As the years have passed, the producers seem to have taken a more active stance against social media that ranges from ignoring its existence and effect on the show to punishing contestants for even mentioning it. And their techniques for vilifying both leads and contestants have evolved from simple editing techniques to outright sabotage with the express goal of undermining the very relationships the show is supposed to be supporting. This came to a head during Bachelor Season 23 in what is perhaps the most defining moment of the pre-COVID era of the franchise, Colton Underwood's fence jump. The fence jump. The year before, in Season 22 of The Bachelor, the producers attempted to derail Ari's relationship with Becca Kufrin by flying her ex-boyfriend Ross to Ica, Peru, where he was convinced to have conversations with both Kufrin and Ari in an effort to win Becca Kufrin back the morning after her successful fantasy suite date. Then, in Season 23, the producers elevated this tactic by flying Cassie Randolph's father to Portugal, where he successfully convinced Randolph to end things with Underwood before the night portion of their fantasy suite date. Underwood was so devastated that he stormed out of his room, hit a camera, jumped a fence, and jogged off into the night, a literal escape from the producers' manipulations. This fence jump moment was featured in virtually every promotional package for the show that season, and it was perhaps the crowning achievement of Elon Gale, who was the lead creative producer during this era. Season 23 was also his last season with the franchise, capping a 10-year run in which he was largely credited as the architect of not only Bachelor in Paradise, but the golden era of the show as well. It seems that Gale's departure likely created something of a power vacuum that led to other producers trying to step in and reproduce the magic moment of the fence jump. But without Gale's creative guidance, their confusion of drama for misery saw their efforts step over the line of plausibility to expose what was obvious producer manipulation with seemingly malicious intent. This was perhaps most apparent in the very next season of The Bachelorette, when after Hannah Brown assertively dismissed Luke Parker on the basis of his misogynistic traditional Christian stance on abstinence and premarital sex, producers brought him back for the next rose ceremony and gave him a ring that they hoped he would use to propose. Hannah Brown's handling of the moment became an iconic rebuke of both Parker and the producers' attempt to derail the fantasy suite round of her season. Then on the day immediately after Hannah Brown's season 15 of The Bachelor concluded, another piece of the puzzle that is the current state of Bachelor Nation came into place. On July 31st, 2019, the podcast Bachelor Happy Hour, hosted by former Bachelorettes Ali Fidakowski and Rachel Lindsay, premiered. The first episode was a recap of the finale of Hannah Brown's season, and the next two episodes would feature interviews with Jed Wyatt, that season's disgraced ring winner, and with Hannah Brown herself. Official Bachelor Nation podcasts. Bachelor Happy Hour, which is owned by Warner Brothers, the same company that owns the Bachelor franchise, served as a means by which the producers could extend the narratives in the show, both false and true. It allowed another level of control about who the audience should consider a villain or a hero, who was deserving of love and who was not, who should be celebrated and who should be maligned. It also served as a platform to mitigate controversy in the nation or as a way to test the likability of any contestants who might have been in the conversation to be the next leads. Furthermore, with the immediate success of the first official Bachelor podcast, Happy Hour created yet another revenue stream for the franchise and its parent company. The official Bachelor Nation podcast formula was honed over the next series of months as Ali and Lindsay interviewed a rotating cast of all-star contestants who were central to the narratives of Bachelor in Paradise Season 6 as it aired. The show managed to give true fans an extended experience without ever revealing too much about what goes on behind the scenes, especially where producer manipulation was concerned. Once Peter Weber's Bachelor Season 24 aired in January of 2020, Bachelor Happy Hour had established itself as a success for Warner Brothers and an integral part of the culture of Bachelor Nation, ready to continue building its listenership over the course of Claire Crowley's upcoming Bachelorette Season 16. But that season, along with everything else across the globe, was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which had a drastic effect on virtually every aspect of not just the season, but the entire franchise and the nation itself. The pandemic. The first and most obvious effect was that without Crowley's season airing in May of 2020, as it was previously scheduled, we became starved for Bachelor content. Bachelor Happy Hour's popularity increased during the pandemic as the only official Bachelor franchise media we could still get on a weekly basis. In the short-lived The Bachelor Presents Listen to Your Heart, which aired April to May of 2020, did little to satisfy the nation, so we turned to social media for every Instagram Live and ultimately every TikTok we could find from Bachelor contestants, leads, and even commentators. And it turned out we weren't the only ones. Bachelorette Season 16. The second cataclysmic effect of the pandemic was the fracturing of Bachelorette Season 16 because of social media. The contestant roster for that season had been revealed online before shooting was postponed, which gave Crowley the opportunity to engage in parasocial relationships with her incoming suitors. And on night one of her season, when it did finally air in October of 2020, the moment she saw contestant Dale Moss step out of the limo, it became clear to all of us that she had fallen in love with him online and he was already the winner of her season, rendering the rest of it a pointless charade. By episode 4, Crowley left the show with Moss, prompting the producers to bring in Tayshia Adams to date Crowley's leftover pool of men and salvage what was left of a season plagued by consistent temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and abysmal production value. This event very likely made two things clear to the producers. Number one, social media had the ability to destroy the format of the show. And two, despite COVID production restrictions forcing them to shoot an entire season with no travel, locked down, and separated from the outside world, holding contestants in their rooms like prisoners until they were needed to shoot a scene, they still didn't have as much control as they thought they did or as much as they wanted. And the final result of Bachelorette Season 16 seemed to be that producers were sent into a panic as they thought of new ways to control the contestants and punish them for their use of social media, which set the stage for what most Bachelor fans would come to consider the worst year in the history of the franchise, 2021. 2021 kicked off with what should have been a celebrated moment. Matt James was cast as the first Black Bachelor in the 20-year history of the show. Instead, after a season that was already laden with transparently malicious producing practices like sending in a group of new contestants halfway through, the worst racism scandal in Bachelor history overshadowed the entire season and resulted in the firing and excommunication of longtime host Chris Harrison. In what seemed like an attempt to bury the fallout from Bachelor Season 25 under a landslide of content, 2021 continued with the decision to produce not one, but two seasons of The Bachelorette, Katie Thurston's Season 17 and Michelle Young's Season 18, along with a new season of Bachelor in Paradise. This relentless schedule guaranteed that most of the audience would be exhausted, if not completely burnt out, by the sheer amount of content, let alone the continued presentation of leads suffering trauma and despair at the hands of the producers, instead of finding love prompting them to attempt an escape, just as Colton Underwood did when he jumped the fence in Bachelor Season 23. Podcast hosts in Paradise. 2021's Bachelor in Paradise Season 7, airing between the two Bachelorette seasons, showed us just how important the official Bachelor Nation podcast hosts were to the franchise. 3 of them were cast in this season, allowing them to serve double duty as on-camera talent and then as podcast commentators on their own performances as they aired. And even within the production itself, Joe and Natasha from Clickbait, as well as Becca from Happy Hour, were given very special treatment during the production itself. Producers granted Becca Kufrin access to a computer and the internet, which allowed her the ability to find information on some of the contestants, including Thomas Jacobs, to whom she is now engaged. Grocery Store Joe was given the role of moral leader of the beach, doing the producers' bidding when they wanted to kick other uncooperative players off the show. And producers literally broke the structure of the format to give Natasha Parker a rose when no male player would give her one to guarantee her more screen time. And none of them were ever given anything approaching a bad edit. They were protected at all costs. The same can't be said for Brendan Moraes and Piper James. Social media punishment. It seems very likely that after the proliferation of influencer culture within the contestant pool over the years and the damage social media did in Bachelor Season 16, the producers were fixated on punishing contestants and making examples of anyone who so much as discussed social media and its role in the show's culture. So when Brendan Moraes and Piper James were caught on camera discussing their Piper James were caught on camera discussing their Instagram numbers, and Brandon had already earned a villain edit for his treatment of official Bachelor Nation podcast host Natasha Parker. The producers sent in Grocery Store Joe to confront them and ultimately deliver a performance that was meant to convey to the audience he had the power to remove them from the show. In the days that followed, Brendan Moraes lost over 100,000 Instagram followers and multiple deals with brands. Despite Michelle Young's season 18 of Bachelorette being fairly well produced and ending in a successful engagement to Nate, the sense that Bachelor in Paradise season 7 was fixed from the beginning was hard to shake. And if there was any hope left in the nation that the producers were going to turn things around and return the franchise to its former glory, the announcement of Michelle Young's 8th place finisher Clayton Eckerd as the next Bachelor dashed it. Eckerd wasn't given much screen time, and as a result, he seemed like just like another white guy who didn't know enough about the show to know what the producers were going to put him through. And even before his season aired in January of 2022, it was clear the producers were going to put him through a lot. Clayton Eckerd, doomed from the beginning. Several recent bachelors have been introduced in the final segment of the prior season of The Bachelorette. Many of them have been given the opportunity to meet some of the contestants who will be appearing on their season in a kind of mini night one. Clayton Eckerd was made to do something else, something we had never seen. He was made to sit and read tweets from a screen in the live studio audience. Every one of the tweets was insulting and cruel. It was as if the producers were telling us, the audience, that they knew we didn't like their choice for Bachelor, and neither did they. This level of disrespect for the lead of their flagship show was a new low, and the season that followed was exactly what we expected after an introduction like that. Eckerd seemed unprepared for the manipulations he encountered as he was maneuvered into a situation that the producers themselves termed the rose ceremony from hell, in which he was convinced that he should tell both of his finalists that he was intimate with them as well as the third contestant. This resulted in the producers cutting Eckerd into one of the worst villain bachelors of all time, causing him to experience significant mental health issues, which he has discussed publicly. But his trauma wouldn't end with his season. The producers would continue to paint him as a villain even in the next season of The Bachelorette, go so far as to script a limo exit for one of the incoming players that included a choir of children singing "Clayton Sucks." But that was only the tip of the iceberg for what would be another disaster in Bachelorette Season 19, which for the first time in America featured two simultaneous Bachelorettes. Dual Bachelorettes. The two victims in the rose ceremony from Hell narrative, Gabby Windey and Rachel Recchia, were granted the dual Bachelorettes role, and the nation was skeptical. Despite both leads assuming everyone in every interview that they were friends and there was no competition between them, we knew better as an audience. Although they got roughly the same amount of screen time over the course of the season, they did not get the same edit. Rachel Recchia was at times presented as villainous, while Windey was presented as a lovable dingbat, just looking for the right man to truly understand her. As a result, Windey amassed over 1 million Instagram followers to Recchia's 540,000, and Gabby Windey was given a spot on Dancing with the Stars. Rachel Recchia was not. And beyond the inherent competition that we all knew was in the DNA of the decision to have dual leads, the season itself suffered from only being able to give the men in the Bachelorettes half the screen time they would have had in a normal season. So we didn't really get a chance to know any of them in a substantive way, and by the end of a season that saw Rachel Recchia alone and Gabby Windey's final rose recipient Eric Schwer embroiled in yet another racism scandal, we were left wondering if the people who made the show actually knew what it was anymore, or if they even enjoyed the job at all. It seemed that every decision being made was actively making everything worse. But 2022 wasn't over. We still had promise. The fun in the sun, not so serious version of The Bachelor that results in more successful relationships than The Bachelor and Bachelorette combined and delivers some much needed humor and goofiness. Misery in paradise. But the laughter in Bachelor in Paradise Season 8 was replaced with tears. Lots of tears, lots and lots of tears. More tears than we might have ever seen in a single season of any of the franchise show. In what seemed like an attempt to shake up the format of Paradise, the producers decided to steal the Casa Amor mechanic from Love Island and separate the successful couples halfway through the season. The party line was that this rending of early romance would make couples who would survive what they called split week even stronger. Instead, it drove all the contestants involved into depressed states that left them listless and resentful. But not all players were subjected to this treatment. Despite the fact that there were no official Bachelor Nation podcast hosts in this season, there were still protected contestants, most notably Michael A. Michael was left without a rose in an early rose ceremony, but because it seemed that producers had designed a season-long narrative for him, they inserted Danielle at the necessary time to give him a rose to keep his story alive, and astonishingly, Danielle and Michael were exempt from split week. If this clear violation of fairness wasn't enough to drive the nation mad, seeing producers write and act out sketches that cruelly made fun of Sally Carson with the use of sex toy props and hair pieces did the trick. It seemed that if a contestant wouldn't do as they were told, or in any way cause more work for producers, they were turned into fools or villains in the edit and even in the construction of the season itself. Teddy Wright, a First Impression Rose recipient, and very well-liked player, had such a seemingly bad experience that she issued a silent protest by leaving the show without saying goodbye to anyone, so the producers couldn't get any more footage of her. And although this season produced a lasting relationship for Brandon Jones and Serene Russell, it will most likely be best be remembered for the group nervous breakdown that occurred when Roddy Matthews left the beach. The contestants had undergone such an immense amount of sleep deprivation and other traumas that they all sobbed with one another for what was presented as the better part of an entire day. The only comfort they seemed to be able to find was in their collective misery, and it's no surprise that we, the audience, felt the same way as another cycle of the franchise we love so much came to a close. Where are we now? And so now the disasters of the past 2 years are behind us, and we are in the precipice of Bachelor Season 27 with another Bachelor who didn't get enough screen time for us to really know anything about. We know he made it to the Fantasy Suite round with Rachel Recchia, and the very next morning she wanted nothing to do with him. Her cited reasons was an age difference, although they were less than a year apart. Many have speculated that Zach Shallcross might have revealed a difference of political opinion in the Fantasy Suite, but we may never know the truth. As we are set to watch night 1 of January 23rd, there are no indications that the producers are aware of the problem. They have done little to generate excitement in the fan base with their selection of Zach Shallcross, aside from the inclusion of the most successful Bachelor of all time, Season 17's Sean Lowe, in some early promotional footage. But simply hearkening back to the golden era when leads were presented as successful, eligible, and remarkable people will likely not be enough to remedy the exodus of longtime fans that's taken place over the past 2 years. As much as we enjoy seeing Sean Lowe scrubbing Zach Shallcross's abs in the shower, it will take more than that to convince us that the franchise is back on track. And ladies and gentlemen, with an expert point of view, Chad from Game of Roses, thank you guys so much for checking out my channel, and also for checking out Game of Roses. If you haven't already, give him some love, tell him you listen to his writings over here, and we'll see you guys later for Patreon. We'll see you later for the private bonus content on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Neal. Bye, everybody.